Welcome back, my friends. I assume that you watched part 1 already, but if you didn't, it's not important that you watch these in order. But they go chronologically by album release date, and not by the year that the band started. I can't say for sure yet, but there will probably be at least a third video, and maybe even a fourth. Whichever the last one will be, it will probably be going backwards a bit because I'm sure I will miss albums that I wanted to use, and I will probably also do like an honorable mention type video just to highlight a few lesser known bands and albums. Anyways, let's pick up where the last video ended, which was 1999. Now I'm going to shake things up a bit here with a split, because this is one of my favorite splits of all time, and for Invocation, it's the only material they ever recorded, which must not be ignored. Let's start with Stargazer, who formed in 1995 and play a very unique style of technical black death metal, and it's a style all their own. Things are a bit more stripped down here compared to what they would do later on, but it is just as good as really anything they've done, in my opinion. One of the most underrated bands out there. Invocation were apparently active from 1997 to 2005, but only recorded this material. Famously, most of the members would go on to form Portal. However, Invocation did not sound much like Portal at all, more straight-ahead death metal with maybe a few Morbid Angel comparisons, which is fine by me. I am a fan of Portal, but I would have loved to have had more music from Invocation. It's been over 20 years, and most of the guys are busy with other bands, so it's probably not very likely to happen. Luckily, though, Stargazer are very much active, so do not sleep on that band. This release is not super easy to find and has never been repressed, so I think that some label should try and make that happen someday. Another one of the godfathers of the Australian underground, Destroyer 666 formed in 1994 as a solo venture of KK Warslut of corpse molestation and bestial warlust. It quickly turned into more of a full band as they picked up steam relatively quick. They would play a style of black thrash metal, not unlike Niflheim from Sweden or Disaster from Germany, except distinctly Australian, of course. They seemed hell-bent on world domination, releasing classic album after classic album, usually with EPs in between, despite setbacks and lineup changes. This has always been KK's band. Typically, I go with the all-time 1997 classic Unchain the Wolves, which will always be my favorite, but today, I'm going to go with the excellent follow-up from 2000, Phoenix Rising. It's a similar beast, maybe a little more melody in the guitar riffs, but still plenty of black thrash metal, full speed, and always going for the throat. Alchemist are another heavy hitter from the Australian underground, at least in my opinion, but they don't sound remotely like any other of the bands or any other band just in general. Forming in 1987, they started out a little more grounded compared to the cosmic entity they would become. Even the more death thrash leaning demos would be almost a thing of the past by 1993 when they released their first album. And while I do like the 3 albums they did in the 90s, I came on board in the early 2000s, and I can't help but be partial to that era. I tend to return most to Organasm from 2000. There's not much here in the way of death metal, and it is a completely original piece of work. The album opens with the sound of a didgeridoo, and the journey just goes from there. Pink Floyd-esque atmospherics, almost Neurosis-type tribal-sounding crescendos. I really don't think you will find anything else like it. I should also mention that the annual metal festival Metal for the Brain was started by some of the guys from Alchemist, along with some of the members of Armored Angel. Bloodduster were active from 1991 to 2017, and probably my favorite grind band ever. They started out playing a more gore grind style before adding rock and roll elements due to their love for AC/DC. At first I wasn't a fan of that decision, but now I wouldn't change a thing. It's perfect. They always had that fuck off punk rock attitude and were infamous for basically trolling the world. Anytime you saw an interview with Jason Fuller, you never knew what he was going to say or do. From talking about scoring a good deal on cocaine or doing an entire interview with his balls out. I always seem to gravitate to the 2003 self-titled album, and I cannot just play it once because it will be stuck in my head for days. It is 31 minutes of fast grind interspersed with AC/DC-esque rock and roll songs, and it's just perfect. I dare you to listen to it and only listen once. Gospel of the Horns were active from 1993 to 2018, with their first demo in '94. They are definitely a pinnacle of Australian black thrash metal, rivaled only by the likes of Destroyer 666. They did not leave behind a massive discography, but there's plenty to look into if you're unfamiliar. My favorite album from them has always been the 2002 debut full-length A Call to Arms, but I also highly recommend the 2000 EP, Eve of the Conqueror. This is the kind of black thrash that could only come from Australia. The nasty black metal vocals, the dirty Motorhead-flavored thrash punk riffing. There were many good bands like this that followed, but Gospel of the Horns were leaders of the pack. Now, Reverend Kriss Hades might be much better known for being the wild axeman for his sadistic execution, but I want him to be equally known for his solo work. I mean, sure, he started doing it around 1991 and only has a demo, a full length, and a live album. His 2002 album, The Wind of Orion, is one of the more underrated black metal albums. As soon as you hit play, you hear the sound of an impending windstorm, until the music kicks in around the 2-minute mark and also sounds like a windstorm. He is a fantastic guitarist, and his guitar work here reminds more of his brief stint in Nazul, and not so much the chaotic war metal style of sadistic execution. I should mention that he plays all instruments on this album, and also handles the vocals, although there are some guest appearances from some of his sadistic execution bandmates. This is a dissonant and somewhat traditional sounding black metal album with a lot of texture and originality. Abominator, to me at least, were a sort of continuation of the Bestia Warlust sound, although both bands did exist at the same time for a few years. Maybe a little bit more death metal sounding, but really close in style and sound. Abominator formed in 1994 and are still at least somewhat active. You really can't go wrong with any of their material, from the demos all the way to the 2015 full length. I tend to reach for the 2003 album Nuctemeron Descent. This album starts with a brief, ominous intro before the all-out salvo begins and really never relents. This is pure, primal-sounding Australian war metal, not to be missed by fans of Bestia Warlust, Blasphemy, and even Angel Corpse. Astriaal are another one of those ridiculously underrated black metal bands. I think that they should be placed next to bands like Nazul and Pestilential Shadows, who are also both underrated, and Astriaal don't necessarily sound like those bands much anyways. Forming in 1998, they play a very fast-paced, black metal with very memorable riffs and well-written guitar melodies, and are not afraid to use an acoustic guitar passage to break it up and add some atmosphere. I'd say that in addition to being excellent songwriters, they are also great musicians. My favorite album is 2003's Renascent Misanthropy, which is just an absolute masterpiece of fast and tight, slightly technical black metal. This album embraces the past while looking forward. If you are a fan of later era Immortal, and early Dark Funeral, or just fast black metal in general, the black metal underground needs to know how good Astriaal are. In addition to checking out that album, you might want to get the EP that came out the same year as well. Pestilential Shadows are, to me, like a sister band to Nazul, and since Nazul are one of my favorite bands, I am more than okay with that. They are also a bit more active than Nazul, so it's nice to get some music from them while you wait for a new Nazul album. Pestilential Shadows formed in 2003 and have released a fair amount of material in those 20 plus years. It is also important to add that they have had shared members with Nazul, and they are bands that associate closely with each other. If I were to compare their work to Nazul, it would most likely be the 1995's debut album Totem. Pestilential Shadows utilize keyboards in their music much less than Nazul, but when they are used, especially on their 2005 debut masterpiece Embraced After Death, they are played by Wraith, who does a lot of keyboard work in Nazul's albums, most notably his work on the 1998 EP Black Seed. If you like faster paced and traditional sounding black metal with great icy melodic riffs, Pestilential Shadows need to be on your list to check out. Hunter's Moon are a side project of Jay Eradicator and Lust, both of Nocturnal Graves and Denouncement Pyre. I say side project because they have been active since 2006 and have only released a demo, an EP, and a full-length album, and in that order. There was some talk around the time that the 2009 Serpent's Lust EP came out, especially because of its black metal sound being so reminiscent of early Bathory. The old black metal fans loved it. They finally released a full length in 2021, but I didn't hear anyone talk about it. I checked it out and it was awesome, but my favorite Hunter's Moon release is the 2006 debut demo. Again, this is early Bathory worship in its purest form. Combine the first 4 Bathory albums, and that is pretty much what you get here, and it does not disappoint. Kinstrife and Blood were actually a recent discovery for me, but I loved it right from the start. I'm a big Summoning fan, and this Soul 2006 album has Summoning written all over it, and it is awesome. This is a solo band of Balaam, aka Luke Mills, who has done time in Nazul, Pestilential Shadows, Drowning the Light, and many more other bands. Dude has quite the resume. Anyways, this band was started back in 2003, but shows no sign of activity, which is a bummer because I want more. The album in question is called On Paths Long Forgotten, and it is a masterclass of epic and melodic black metal. Heavy on the keyboards because, again, the Summoning comparison. A number of bands have attempted the Summoning sound, but few have done it as well as Kinstrife and Blood. So, I've stated many times on this channel that I am a fan of depressive black metal, but few bands have been able to touch the mastery of Austere. Many black metal fans love Austere despite not being into most depressive black metal, and that is, in this case, understandable. The musicianship and songwriting here is nearly untouchable. Forming in 2005, they have been pretty quiet since the release of their second album in 2009, despite its success. I love everything that they have done, but my favorite austere release is the debut 2007 album, Withering Illusions and Desolation. That album title really suits the anguished, howling vocals and the droning, repetitive yet melodic guitar riffs, and the all-around classy songwriting approach. Whether you are a depressive black metal fan or not, the chances are good that this album will win you over. Atomizer had a cult following, and I would say that they are one of the more underrated black thrash bands from the Australian underground. Sure, you can happily put them next to Destroyer 666 and Gospel of the Horns, but Atomizer seem to always have their own sound. They formed in 1998 and therefore were a little late to the scene. However, they put out at least one release per year for the first 6 years as a band. They left behind a flawless discography, but I always find myself returning to their 2008 final album, Caustic Music for the Spiritually Bankrupt. I mentioned that they were a unique band, and this album stands out the most. I think Voivod fans should be taking note here. There is still plenty of thrashing to be found here, but the odd riffs and the unusual time signatures make this a fascinating and captivating listen. Woods of Desolation can sit right next to the previously discussed austere in terms of both style and quality. The earlier material is maybe a bit more raw and has more post-rock type influences. For those that might be scared off by the post-rock tag, don't let it stop you from giving Woods of Desolation a shot. It will be your loss. This band was formed in 2005 by D and P Knight, but has been a solo project of D since 2008. My personal favorite release by Woods of Desolation would have to be the 2008 debut full-length Toward the Depths, although it is hard to choose one release out of a discography that is pure quality. The production here is quite raw, yet perfectly audible, not unlike the early Burzum albums. The post-rock influenced riffs and crescendos really work here, and the vocals are looming in the background full of despair and heavy reverb. Anyone looking to give depressive black metal a shot should start right here. Misery's Omen are one of the more unique black metal bands. Unique enough to stand out, but orthodox in approach enough to gain fans of pure black metal. The band was formed in 1999 by members of Cauldron Black Ram, Stargazer, Denouncement Pyre, and Mournful Congregation. Their most recent release and only full-length album from 2008 is, in my opinion, their crowning achievement and a complete masterpiece. Considering that half of the band play in Stargazer, it is no surprise that the musicianship here is top-notch, especially for black metal. Not only can you hear the bass guitar here, but it is dominant in the mix and quite busy. The drumming is creative and precise with some very cool fills and seems to masterfully add to every song. The riffs are melodic and trance-inducing, and the vocals are just a step away from sounding unhinged in the vein of someone like Rainer Lindferman of Bethlehem, although still a bit maniacal. In fact, Misery's Omen sound almost like a combination of Bethlehem and Stargazer, though even more technical and unpredictable. The nightmarish Lovecraftian cosmic entity known as Portal formed in 1994, although they wouldn't really start gaining steam until 2003 when they released their debut album Sepia. The only band at the time that you could use as a comparison would be maybe Deathspell Omega, though Portal were a little more death metal sounding. Their music is both technical and non-conventional, and is literally the soundtrack to a nightmare or the ascension of the old ones. My personal favorite album of theirs has to be Swarth, their third album from 2009. The music of Portal is very polarizing, so not everyone is going to get it. I have been a fan for most of their existence, and I am always waiting to see what they do next. Out of all of the post 2000 Australian black metal bands, nobody has achieved cult status the way that Drowning the Light has. Sole member Asgore is a black metal legend in the making and is currently also in USBM cult legend Black Funeral, among other bands. However, Drowning the Light is his top priority, and his discography makes that obvious, as he has dozens of releases in his 20 years in this band. The first release I ever picked up was the seventh full length, The Blood of the Ancients from 2009, and just might still be my favorite, along with From the Abyss from 2015. Starting off with an amazing mystical sounding acoustic guitar intro fading into the sound of rain, and I can't think of a better intro in recent times. Track 2 lurches head on into a raw black metal attack that reminds me of prime Finnish black metal bands like Horna or Sargeist. Asgore is a good musician and an even better songwriter, and this album will never bore you. He likes variation with his releases, too, so you never know what is coming next, but you won't have to wait for it very long. Razor of Occam are one of the lesser known and underappreciated black thrash bands in the Australian scene. My guess would be the lengthy gaps in between releases, because this is some seriously ripping stuff, and should be sitting next to the big dogs. Or dingoes? Alright, enough with the stereotypes. I had to do it, but Razor of Occam had everything you need. The obligatory Destroyer 666 members, a Metal Blade Records contract, and a ripping classic Australian sound. Hell, they even had an amazing band name. Go track down their 2009 debut full-length, Homage to Martyrs. Just take my word for it, this thing rips hard. Starts off with, dare I say, typical raspy black metal vocals, thrash riffing, and a blazing guitar solo at the 15-second mark. I bet you find this cheap on Discogs. Buy it and thank me later. Though Australia might be best known for black thrash or black death war metal stuff, Mournful Congregation went in the other direction with slow and, well, mournful sounding funeral doom. Basically, you would be forgiven for assuming this was a European band or from the UK somewhere. At this point, Mournful Congregation are absolute legends amongst the doom crowd. Even being from Australia and not signed to a bigger label didn't seem to hinder them too much, though they recently signed to Osmos, and that will no doubt help them reach more people. Forming in 1993, my favorite album has always been the June Frost album from 2009. This is just a master class of funeral doom. If you are into Mourning Beloved, Occam, or Morgion, you should know Mournful Congregation, and in fact, you might just have a new favorite band.